Hey there, welcome to Toxic Male Manifesto, and we're doing a special segment today. This is actually part of our tool of the week. So what I'm going to be doing is showing you a little bit of the process on how I go about making something. What I'm doing today is I'm going to make 4 speaker boxes for some speakers that are about 30 inches high by about 16 inches wide, and they're for the racing track that we've got, which is the Langley Quarter Midget Racing Association. Anyway, as part of being a member, I do work parties. So the work parties I do for this club is that I generally build stuff and make things. That's using my skills. So what I have here is I got 4 sheets of 1/2 inch plywood, actually 2 1/2 inch and 2 3/4 inch plywoods. And part of what I do is I'm an environmentalist. So I like to make sure nothing goes in the landfill. I like to make sure nothing gets wasted. I like to make sure that nothing gets thrown out. And additionally, this stuff is expensive. These 4 sheets of plywood and 1 bag of screws were $224. When people say, you know, can you do the job a little cheaper? Really, I can't. Honestly, the materials are so expensive that, construction is just absolutely astronomical in price. So what I do is I take all of my stuff, right, that I need to make, and I've got all my pieces that I'm going to be making, and what I've done is I draw them on a piece of paper and I figure out where my cuts are going to be on my plywood and how I can get the maximum amount of stuff from these 4 sheets of plywood. So what I do is I'll start with that. So I'm going to start by ripping 16 inches off the side of 2 sheets of these plywoods, and then I'm going to cut my side pieces first out of the 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to cut my tops and bottoms from the 3/4 inch, and I'm going to cut them using all of these dimensions. So for starters, I'm going to measure it, right? Which tape measure, where'd you go? Right here. Generally, I prefer to use imperial only, and the reason is because I can look at both sides of the tape measure, and it's got the same little marks on it. If you've got a metric tape measure, which is imperial and metric, then half of the tape measure is going to be metric, and it's a little bit harder to work with. I would personally rather go all metric for everything. Metric is just a better system all in all. Everything's in multiples of 10. Imperial is kind of a retarded system, but because we're next door neighbors to the largest free nation in the world, I think, and a pretty darn good neighbor, the United States, they use imperial, and everything we trade with them comes in imperial. So that means the pieces of plywood that I've got here are 4 feet by 8 feet sheets of plywood. They're not metric. Our nails and our screws and all of our lumber comes in imperial measurements. Everything we do in the construction site is always an imperial, and that's because of our trade with our biggest neighbor, which is the United States. So as much as I'd like to use metric, I don't get to. And one of the things about young people is you need to learn imperial. And one of the things you also need to know is you need to know fractions. 1/8, 1/4, 1/16, 1/32. Those are our measurements. That's what we do our construction in. We don't use metric. So if you show up at a job site having gone to high school and you've never learned imperial, you're going to have a hard time doing the job. There's actually tape measures you can get that actually have the fractions on them. But if you can't add and subtract 1/4 and 1/8 and come up with 3/8, then you're going to have a bit of a problem on the job site. Do your math. Honestly, math is probably one of the most important things if you want to be a constructioner. So basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out, I don't know where I put the pins. Okay, I'm going to lay out my 16 inches, make a mark. Down at the bottom, I'm going to lay out 16 inches. Okay, make a mark. Then I'm going to take this thing here, it's called a chalk line. Chalk line goes like so. Hook it on one end. Wheel it all the way down here. Put it on there. Pick up the string, drop it. Now you got a nice little blue line. I've got hardly any chalk in here, and the reason is I don't want lots of chalk on here because then it makes too much of a mark. So now I've got a nice little blue line, and I'm going to cut that with a skill saw. Okay, so here we are. I've got the line snapped on here. Basically, I'm just going to rip 2 16-inch pieces or 3 16-inch pieces. Then I'll stack them up one on top of each other, and then I'll cut all my sides from these 3 strips. So what I have underneath here is I have 1.5 inches of wood there and 1.5 inches of wood down there, so that when I cut, it won't go into the next level. What I do is I set the depth of the saw. This is an 8.5-inch saw, which is a little bit of an overkill, but I kind of like this saw. Anyway, so I'll set it so that it penetrates the wood by about 1/4 inch. You don't want the blade sticking too far down on the other side of the wood because you don't really know what's down there. Maybe there's nails and crap like that, so you don't want to hit those again. You'll notice that I set the depth with the saw not plugged in. Okay? Never ever set the depth or do anything to your saw, because if you do, contractor saws don't have safeties on them. Okay, so I'm going to show you that. When you buy a homeowner's saw, it has 2 switches you have to pull in order to make it operate. A contractor saw has 1. Okay? That's because we're supposed to be professional and we're supposed to know what we're doing. And we know enough to take the plug out when we're working on the saw or when we're doing something. That there is your lever. Check to make sure they're tight. Okay? So you're going to put your saw here. Okay? Now, what you can do is you can do 1 or 2 things. I can see the blade down here, so I can line it up with this. Also, if the saw is straight, hasn't been dropped off 7th story 10 times, then the guard is going to be, and the deck is going to be square, so you can use that also to follow. Okay? So, I do this. You always shut the saw after you've exited the wood. Don't shut the saw while it's in the wood. It wouldn't be a big deal on this small plywood. But if you shut the saw off while something bigger, like you're inside a 2x6 or 2x10 or cutting and ripping, and you take your finger off the trigger, sometimes the blade will make a bite and kick the saw back. So you want to be careful about that, okay? These things are dangerous. This thing just cut this piece of plywood here in that much time. What do you think it would do to your fingers and your hands? Anyway, so what we're doing now is I've got my 3 strips of 16 inches wide, and I'm going to cut, I need 8 sides for these 4 plywood boxes. So what I've done is I've laid them out, I've got them stacked together. Fortunately, I realized when I was about halfway through that I forgot to allow for the 3/4 inch top and bottom. So the insides would have been a little bit too small. So fortunately, before I even cut, there's a rule in carpentry where you measure twice and cut once. Well, I measured twice this time, and I'm only going to cut once. Once you cut this wood, you can't make it bigger. Okay, so now, make sure you scratch out the line you don't want, because guess what will happen if you don't? You're liable to cut it. So now you take your skill saw. You need to adjust the depth on the skill saw. What do you do when you adjust your depth? You unplug it. Okay? Lift the little lever, you adjust the depth. So you want the skill saw to protrude below the work about 1/2 inch. There you go. Skill saw's adjusted. Okay? Plug the skill saws in. Now, one of the things you want to do, especially when you're doing lots of wood, you want to make sure the skill saw winds up to full RPM before you enter the wood. Otherwise it can buck and kick, or it will just rip off the grain of the wood. Okay? So you set the saw up so it's actually where you want it. We need something underneath here, and the reason why we do is because without something underneath, this part's going to drop and then it's going to pinch. Can you pass me that piece of wood that's sitting right there, James?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So you put it underneath so that this is not going to drop and pinch the skill saw. Okay? So, here you go. Wind it up. Okay, set one through. Give you a piece of wood. Wind it down. Now you don't want the wood underneath where the blade is going to be. You want it in between so the two pieces of wood are independent. Okay. Move your work. Wind the skill saw up. You may notice that I'm using Makita again. Makita just happens to be my favorite power tool. There's lots of different brands, and what you'll find is that when you get working in construction, certain tool is going to be your favorite. Okay? I just happen to like Makita. Now you have 8 sides, and then you got one extra piece in case you've got an extra side. Okay, so yesterday we cut all of our plywood up into segments and sections so that we can assemble our boxes. What I did after the camera was off is I took this stuff, which is called copper naphtha. There's different brands. This particular one here is Armor All Copper 2. Now this is incredibly toxic stuff. I call it green death. And the reason I call it green death is because back in my day when I was younger, it was made from copper, chromium, and arsenic. That's what CCA lumber was. That's what this stuff was. The stuff that's in there now is equally toxic. If you were to get this on your skin, it can leach into your system. You'll notice that I'm wearing gloves right now. So last night I went and I painted the end cuts of all this stuff, my pre-cut lumber, with the copper naphtha. There's other brands that you use for end cuts. I keep it in a container that's like this, and then put it, and I just use a paintbrush to apply it. The stuff is, you don't want to be touching it. Don't get it in your mouth, don't get it splashing in your eyes. This stuff is bad. Now I have lots of chemicals on the job site, and I call it by its appropriate name, green death, black death, and white death. And that refers to how bad the stuff is and the kind of care that we need to take. I'm almost 60 years old. The reason I'm still alive, the reason I don't have any respiratory problems is a couple of reasons. I don't smoke and I don't drink, but I also don't touch or play with the chemicals in an unsafe manner. It's really, really important. Okay? Okay, so I have all my pieces now. They're all pre-cut, they're all copper tube, they're all dry. I don't need gloves anymore. Now, the thing is I've never really worn gloves. Yeah, I get slippers occasionally, but you know something? By the time you've been doing it as long as me, I can smash my thumb some days and it doesn't even hurt that much. So, after a while, you toughen up. Got my tool sitting here handy. The design is I want to have the thing flush on the top so I can screw straight down to it, and that the water will run off the sides. Screw in a little tiny bad spot, we'll just move it a bit. That's the nice thing about screws is you can take them out if you have them, look what you got, okay? So that's one. Take another side. Restart some screws in here. The screws you're using right now are ACQ compatible, which means if you don't use the proper screws on this stuff, this green stuff that the wood's made from can actually eat the screws. So you either have to use ACQ compatible Gibbs screws or stainless steel. And what people don't really realize, the reason why this stuff lasts for so long is because of the toxic chemicals that are inside it. Now I'm not putting a pile of screws in yet until I'm actually happy with the entire thing. I'm putting enough to keep it here. Then once I'm happy with it, then I will actually make more. So I've got bottoms in here. There's bottoms. Okay. Bottom goes in like so. Trying to remember how I designed it. There we go. So it goes like so. And what it's going to do is it's going to just spread it out. Okay. So the bottom's going to be flush. What I also done is I want the bottom to be at a bit of a slope so that any moisture or anything like that that's inside these speaker boxes. These are speaker boxes for big speakers to go, loudspeakers, to go inside of, and that way they don't have to be, they could be outside in the winter time or in the summertime. We'll bring them in the winter. The boxes will stay up there and the speakers will just come out and go. Now we don't have a lot of really crappy weather, but we have so what you're doing is you're protecting anything from that particular element, which is rain. Okay, so your screws are in there. Now that's only temporarily screwed. Now we need a top. Right here. Okay. There's your top. I'm going to have it hanging out the back a little tiny bit. Okay. Put it on as straight as you want to have it. Spacer. So we're just using the 3/4 inch as a sort of a guide so I can tell if we're square. We're not building a piano here. What we're building is a box for speakers to be inside. So it's, you know, there's a value in taking enough time to do a good job, but there's also no value in wasting a whole bunch of time. So I pre-cut some pieces for the sides. Where is the other one? Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to put something on the sides right there, and that'll tell us where to go. Now I'm going to put these little pieces on the sides here, right? And I've already cut a bunch of them. They're all got little angles on them and stuff. They're going to be, you know, it's not really a big deal how close they are, but I'm just going to put them there so we got extra strength so we can screw to something. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple screws through here. And what I'm going to do is afterwards take my angle grinder, cut off the inside screws, and then people won't get scratched by them. So we know what the size is there. Let's pull that over to about the same distance. There we go. Which is a little edge of the grip here. The water's going to drop off the back. So when I go to put them on the pole, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the top. I'm going to just grab something, and then I'm going to cut a notch like this. On the bottom, I'm going to put a piece of wood right here with a notch on it, so that we could put a piece of wood on the post, right? And it'll hook on here. And that way they just take the box, stick it up on the post, screw, screw, screw. Now you take your speaker, you just put it in. End of the season, take the speaker out. So this is what the finished product's going to look like. Speaker goes inside there. Protected from the elements from the front. Got lots of overhang on the top. Got a slope. Because there's no edges of the grain on the top, I don't even have to put a roof on it, because pressure treated lumber with the grain going in that direction with a bit of a slope will run the water off. Anyway, so that's it for that particular job. I'm taking those up and I'm going to put them on a post tomorrow at Langley Quarter Midget Racing Association. So, thank you. Have a nice day. Just a reminder, if you like this video, click on the bottom. There's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. You can like our thing, post, and if you do, then you'll get all our Toxic Male Manifesto, Toxic Male trade type tips, and other things that we sometimes post. And just a reminder, read my book if you got a chance. I write about fiction, about things that would take us to apocalyptic times. Basically, if you have ever read 1984, I write the prequel to 1984. Thank you. Have a nice day. If you can't be good, be really good at it.